Hello, welcome to The Laughter Effects, the podcast in which we explore and celebrate the lifelong relationship with comedy and laughter of a special guest. This week we have Hugh Bonneville. Hugh, how are you?
Very well. Nice to see you.
You too. Where are you?
I am in London on a muggy afternoon and about to go to the Park Theatre in Finsbury Park to appear as a mystery sheriff. I don't know if you've heard about this, but the Park Theatre every other year does a fundraiser in which there is a cast and a sort of murder mystery takes place, but the inspector is new every single performance and is fed the lines in his ear. His or her ear. So I did it a couple of years ago, and it's deeply humiliating, but hopefully quite fun.
So it's comedy. So we're starting off. It's comedy, basically.
It's comedy, folks.
It's comedy, folks.
Yeah.
It's comedy, folks. We're going to go right back to the beginning. So I listened to a podcast the other day, you and Giles Brandreth, and you described your dad as having had a twinkle in his eye. What was into the Bonneville household? Who was making you laugh? Was there much of a sense of humour there?
There was in a sort of gentle way. My father was a surgeon. My mum had been a nurse, and but they had a really good sense of humour. Dad really latched onto the pythons quite early.
Did he?
And I think he found the combination of slapstick and intelligence and just bonkersness really enchanting or rather captivating. Though it was an early memory was being allowed to stay up if I was very good. And I looked at, for some reason, I was looking it up when I was writing my memoir, I was looking at the timings of the Python shows. They were quite late. They were on about 11 o'clock a lot of the time. And they jumped around the schedules a bit. And but that my brother and my dad were very much into that. And really it was my brother who was the source of a lot of my comedic interest back in the day. Dad had I think given him some Goons records, and that really led to the Goons scripts being around, and so it developed from there. Really, I was 8 years younger than my brother, so I was inheriting a lot of stuff that he'd first laughed at.
Did that mean you sort of had a slightly more advanced sense of humour for your age because you were influenced by somebody who was 8 years older than you?
I don't know about that, whether I was more advanced, but it was. I do think that. It goes right back to. Put it this way: I think for someone of my age, I was more in tune with perhaps things like Hancock's Half Hour than I might otherwise have been, because my brother had been exposed to it and loved it. So things like Hugh Paddick and Kenneth Williams in Round the Horn became a real staple. The Polari and all that sort of thing. The monologues of Joyce Grenfell I adored, and indeed the monologues of Bob Newhart. I found that form of writing, that form of comedy, where the audience is doing a lot of work. I found really engaging, and in fact, I came back to it much later in life as well, when I was directing a friend of mine, and we wrote monologues together for him to perform, and I directed, and I love it. I love it when the audience is having to use its imagination and guess what's going on at the other end of the phone or the conversation.
Did you ever get to see anyone like that live, like a Joyce Grenfell or a Bob Newhart?
I didn't actually, and I wish. I mean, I love review and I love sketches. That world, I didn't actually. I wish I'd seen Maggie Smith and Kenneth Williams doing their review. Obviously the reviews of the 50s and 60s were legendary. It was a staple in those days. I did go and see. I do remember seeing a show called Behind the Fridge, which was a spin-off of Beyond the Fringe, which I think Peter Cook and Dudley Morse were still in. Again, my dad, was really taken with him. I'm not sure for sure that my dad would have loved Derek and Clive, but he certainly loved the anti-establishment, even though he was very establishment himself, the sort of anti-establishment flavour that behind the Beyond the Fringe, first began to satirise, I suppose, and that rising list of comedians in the 60s and into the 70s, which obviously gave birth to Python, which really was a staple in our household.
And it transferred. I think it was on at the Fortune Theatre in London, but it transferred to Broadway. behind the
Did
fridge.
it?
Yeah, it
I
did.
didn't know that. I wonder how it went down there because, that it's quite not sophisticated, but what's the word? It's quite particular. I think
Yeah,
that
but
type
Python as
of
well. But Python
yes, yeah,
transferred to, Live at the Hollywood Bowl, etc. Some of
that's
them got
very
it.
true. There's some of them did. For some reason, I think this. I'm going to get horrible sort of accusations now of racism or something, but I do think Canadians get it better than the Americans. I don't
Yeah,
know why, but I think there's something in the. I think it's the use of irony or the use of whatever levels of ridiculousn's that you have in Python that are really smart as well as being daft. It's
yeah.
hard to describe, but if you get Python, you're welcome to my dinner table.
So was it your brother who got your father into Python?
I think it was probably looking back. I do think I've got just a strong memory of my brother's album collection and things. The early Pythons or some of the Python sketches were on record.
Yeah.
As the TV show was being broadcast, I guess. But I do remember there's one sort of it was a real life lesson. My dad and I were meant to be going to the boat show at Earl's Court. I used to love just going to pick up all the leaflets about the different boats. Never went sailing, but I mean I did latterly. But I used to love just collecting all the bump. And so I was going to go with Dad to the boat show, and he said, "Well, you've got a choice here. We're going to have to leave very early in the morning. So you either go to bed early and we get up and have a good night's sleep and you go to the boat show, or you can stay up and watch Monty Python, but you won't be going to the boat show because you'll be too tired." So I said, "Well, I tell you what, I'll watch Monty Python," knowing that with my long eyelashes and charm, I would be able to do both. So I watched Monty Python, went to bed. I got up in the morning and Dad had gone. I was absolutely heartbroken, and I realized that there was a good life lesson. If given a choice, you've got a choice to make.
Yeah, absolutely. That's brilliant. Just moving on to Cambridge. You went to which college?
I was at Corpus Christi. Yeah.
And was there a choice of, did you ever consider Footlights? Because I know that that's where you started, you went into a theatre group there, didn't you, at Cambridge?
I did, yeah. I don't think it's too cruel to say that the Footlights weren't necessarily the
force they once were.
the force that they were either
Yeah.
before or after. I think we were between people like Stephen Fry and Hugh Laurie, and just ahead of David Baddiel, I think, or had David. Anyway, it was a slight, a couple of really brilliant performers, don't get me wrong, but it didn't quite have the same impact as it had before and after. The League of Gentlemen hadn't arrived yet. They were but a twinkle in their weird parents' eyes. But I did audition, and I did get it. In fact, I got into a show which Nick Hancock and Steve Punt were producing, I think. But then I couldn't do it for some reason, and I ended up writing one sketch for their summer show, and the entire joke of the sketch, it was a "Call My Bluff" sketch, and it was the spelling, the letters that came up on the board were PENIS, and the entire joke was that it was never pronounced. So there were all sorts of variations, but you never said the joke was you never actually said it as it is usually pronounced. And so this "Call My Bluff," I went to see it at the Arts Theatre, and I remember it was in the first half of the show, I think, and I was very excited that I was going to have a sketch performed by Footlights, and it came to the sketch, and the sort of what was his name, Robert Robinson character went ping, and the next word is penis. Completely ruined the sketch. They had no idea what the sketch was about. So and then I remember turning, a friend of mine was in the audience and turned to me at the interval and said, "Oh, which sketch was yours then?" I said, they cut it. It wasn't on."
Have you
So
ever
that was
seen
my
this,
Footlights career.
and you've never seen the sketch performed properly?
No, and nor should it be. It
Nor
was a
should it
lousy
be.
sketch.
So what I know, I was listening to the Giles podcast, and I think you did. Was it Romeo and Juliet? Was one of the first things you did at Cambridge. Any comedy at all within the group, not Footlights, within?
Yeah, I did. I remember me and some mates, we created a little fragment offshoot called Footlice, and we did some medieval knockabout humour, which I think was quite esoteric and quite niche. We did, not the Pardoner's Tale, but some sort of Canterbury Tales type exploits where we all dressed as women and the girls dressed as boys or whatever. It was all a lot of cross-dressing malarkey in St Edward's Passage Playroom, which was actually a really good crucible of talent. Which where Stephen Fry put on one of his first plays. I think it was called Latin. Which he developed there, and each generation who've been through there have had the great benefit of Cambridge not having a drama degree, and so that everybody who puts on stuff is a passionate amateur, and I think that was really good for the cross fertilization of ideas. You get an architect chipping in ideas with a natural scientist, with someone who was reading law. And you would develop material that way. There was a guy in my college who'd put on a play every week in the basement of this strange little alleyway passage, this playroom as it was called. It was about the size of a kitchen table and had a night bulb, but he wrote a play every week to be performed in it. And that's wonderful, to have that sort of buzzing around of ideas. But comedy, I did do some comedy, but I can't, but not in the sort of Footlight sense. I did comedic plays and loved them. But no, I left out and out comedy to the grown-ups.
Yeah. Who was the funniest person you met those sort of like formative years, if you like? Was there anybody who you used to meet and you were in for a hoot?
I have to say Tony Slattery. He was a year or so above me, I think. But his energy, which of course became in a way his greatest enemy, because he was so highly energized and passionate and quick-witted. Neil Malarkey was in that same group. They were brilliantly funny. I loved watching them. Steve Punt, Nick Hancock as well. I found them brilliant to watch. But I was at the time much more sort of focusing on straight plays, or rather more constructed plays, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. And what about some of the, because you studied theology, some of the funniest people I've ever met have been theologians, have been men or women of God, etc., especially in the Jewish faith. Some of the rabbis I've met before are incredibly funny. And what was it like within your course? Were there any wits, any theological wits in there?
Well, I wouldn't say that. They were great characters, and I
Yeah.
really enjoyed studying a lot of behavioral tics, put it that way. I mean, we've all got our notion of what an ordained man of the cloth behaves like, or indeed what academics are like, and there were those sort of stereotypes with bells on. One of my dons was Rowan Williams, who went on to become
wow.
Archbishop of Canterbury, who taught, who specialised in, I think it was first century Christianity, and I was just mesmerised by his beard most of the time, because it was such a big, fulsome beard and had bits in it, and I was just I spent most of my seminars with him, just or tutorials, supervisions as they're called, wondering what he'd had for breakfast. But he had a very gentle voice, a very gentle manner. Of course, he's a wonderful poet as well, so he had this very calming manner. Whereas I do remember one particular New Testament theologian having completely, I mean, he was so hyper, it was hilarious. And he was always dropping bits of paper, and, there were sort of pencil shavings falling out of his ears, and just wonderful characters, really, as well as being, good people who were passionate about what they studied. I just was a little bit removed. I wasn't a man of the cloth myself. I loved it. I loved the subject. I found it fascinating, but I approached my theology from a historical context rather than from a position of faith. But I love anyone who's passionate. I find that the more excited people get about something they're interested in, the funnier they get, because they just assume the rest of the world is equally fascinated. So on the one hand, they can either become great bores, or they become almost comedic characters because of their passion and their indulgence, if you like.
Just moving on to your early career, you were at the Regent's, the open air theatre. We were talking when we had a chat a couple of weeks ago. We talked about Bernard Bresslaw. So we've gone from the Pythons, the sort of intelligent humour, to carry-ons, which you also enjoyed when you were younger. And you got to work with Bernard Bresslaw. Again, one of these, because obviously he's associated with the carry-ons, he gets sort of stereotyped. But he was doing Shakespeare, serious theatre, long before he did carry-ons, and for a long time after. And you got to see that firsthand.
I did. It was my very first job, and he was playing Bottom in A Midsummer Night's Dream, and he was a big man, big sort of 6'6" and
Was,
you
yeah.
know, big heavy set chap. But he was the gentlest soul, and he, for those of you who remember the Carry On films, he always played the gormless one,
Did, yeah.
because
I
he was
only
this big.
asked and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
only asked, yeah.
yeah, had this sort of big, sort of baritone voice that sounded like the bottom of a barrel of Madeira, but he had terrible eyesight, so he had these really really thick glasses. So when he took them off, he just looked completely gormless because he couldn't see. But he was a very smart man. He was very well read. I think he'd won the gold medal at RADA. He was a really delightful man, and I have to say, for me as a new boy, just watching him, watching him surf the audience in terms of the comic timing, and as Bottom, when Bottom has the great death scene of Pyrrhus, he would absolutely milk it, but brilliantly. The death scene would take 10 minutes because he just knew how to milk it, as the character of Bottom, it's implied he does. He's this big character. He's this big ego, and Bernard didn't. He didn't have a big ego, but he knew how to play this character superbly. And I used to love just watching him night after night. And I learned a lot about timing from him, and just the discipline of theatre, because he, like all good comedic actors, took it very seriously and didn't know he was in a comedy.
Yeah.
That's the key thing.
Yeah.
As soon as you wink at the audience, it's a different type of comedy. Sometimes it works, but
Yeah.
actually, if you're too much in on the joke, then it loses its comedic bite.
Yeah.
And he was just wonderful to be around and to watch.
He actually died at the theatre, didn't he? I think he had a heart attack. He actually died at the open air. It was the same day as Les Dawson died, and which was
Good Lord.
unfortunate in the sense, obviously, to lose those two on the same day. But everybody, all the headlines were Les Dawson. He was completely forgotten about. He was sort of relegated
Really?
to page 6 or 7, and it was very very sad because he was much loved. He really was.
He was much loved, particularly within the industry. And as you say, I think because of the Carry On films, he'd been blanketed with that, if you like, or
Yeah.
rather than the nuance of his other work, which was sublime to be. I felt very fortunate to have worked with him and watched him, and he was very sweet to a youngster like
Yeah.
me, always kind, and we always when we went on tour, I remember we were in Germany, in Munich, and each day we'd go off in our little groups to go on little jaunts before the show, and most of us went at some point to Dachau, the concentration camp, and you could tell who'd been there that day because of their mood when they came into the dressing room.
Yeah.
And Bernie was this big chap, and there was a lot of banter between him and an actor called Paul Raffield, who used to help him with his makeup. He had this sort of with this sort of almost commedia dell'arte type white paint that was put on his bald head. And so Paul would help put it on, and they'd have a bit of a back and forth and a banter. I used to love listening to them. And I can just remember the night, I think it was the Thursday night that we were in town in Munich. And Paul started in on his banter, and Bernie just said, "Not tonight, love. Just want to be quiet tonight." And he'd been to see something so mind-blowingly awful,
Yeah.
that we all ought to remember every day.
Yeah, indeed. Sticking with the carry-ons, you mentioned Julian and Sandy, Kenneth Williams. Just quickly, we talked about review because Kenneth did a couple of. I think he did one review, Share My Lettuce with Maggie Smith. Have you ever done review? It's kind of like a forgotten theatrical genre, and it's only, I think Are they ever put on anywhere these days?
I don't know. I seem to remember I did something along those lines at Cambridge, that we did put a series of sketches and songs together, but it wasn't as you say, it was a thing of the past in those days. My great friend, who's now a director, Christopher Luscombe,
Yeah.
he put together the Shakespeare Review, which he compiled while at the RSC. We were both at the RSC, and the RSC had its own fringe. At the end of the sort of summer season, and he put together with a pal the Shakespeare Review, in which he drew on sketches about Shakespeare, songs about Shakespeare, with a light tone to it, and it became a huge success, and it's been touring the world in various forms ever since. And it's a really wonderful thing. I remember him. he had to, of course, once he got it, having done it as a one-off thing for the Fringe, it then started to gain traction. So he had to sort of get it all properly together and get all the copyright sorted. And of course, some of these sketches had been written by people who were long gone, and so he had to ring. I think there was a sketch about Othello, and so he had to ring whoever owned the estate, which was the widow of this chap, and she herself was in one of the actors' retirement facilities. I think not Denville Hall, but something like that.
Yeah.
So he had to ring Denville Hall and say, I'd like to speak to Janice. And he said, I just imagine this, there's someone holding the phone and saying, Janice, it's the Royal Shakespeare Company on the phone, and everybody in the care home getting really cross that Janice had finally had her call. But no, review has diminished somewhat. But
Yeah.
I think in this world of AI and screens, I'm a firm believer that the live experience, be it comedic or otherwise, is sort of having a renaissance. Because we no longer trust what we see on a screen.
Yep.
We don't know if it's deep fake or if it's true in any way, shape or form. The live experience you can't fake. Whether you're telling a joke in a pub or you're telling your parents what the school day was like, you're editing a sort of a highlighted version, you are performing in some way. And I do think the same is true for theatre and indeed, any live arts performance. I think it's at a premium now. We cherish that collective experience more and more. So maybe there's a gap for the return of the sketch form or the review.
I hope so. I think certainly it's one of the benefits of social media is people have started. So this might be funny. Not all of it is, but you get all these people doing skits and bits of stand-up, etc., etc. And whereas in the 70s, 60s, it was predominantly, there wasn't a lot of live comedy, certainly provincially. It was sort of sitcom based, whereas now it's completely gone the other way around. There are more stand-up comedians around today than there have ever been. I follow 200 or 300 on social media, and I'm just, it's the tip of the iceberg. And it's a good thing. I genuinely think comedy. I don't think comedy is has been in as good a place for a very, very long time.
I think that's an interesting point. I mean, I think the democratization that things like everybody's a filmmaker, or rather everybody has a camera phone of some sort and can film content. And that we can release it on a worldwide platform immediately. And if it's any good, the taste buds will be tickled and people will tune into it, whatever it is.
Yeah, exactly. Just talking about Kenneth Williams. So, what fascinated you about Kenneth Williams? I'm actually involved in an opera that's being written about Kenneth Williams at the moment, and I'm helping with the libretto, but helping with the libretto. But he's one of those characters. It was his 100th anniversary. It was his centenary a few months ago, and he continues to fascinate. And obviously, he did Share My Lettuce with Maggie Smith, and then I think they also did a Shaffer together later on. When you worked with Maggie, you worked with her on, I think, a play as well, and as well as Downton. Did you ever get to talk about Kenneth?
I remember early on asking her. I said, "Can I ask you about Kenneth Williams?" And she just sort of went, "No, I can't talk about it. It's too painful.
Yeah.
I miss him so much." And so I thought, oh gosh, but that was Maggie on that day.
Yeah.
And then, a couple of years later, I remember, we were in between setups and someone was mentioning him and she was roaring away and laughing. So I just called her on the wrong day, I think, to talk about Kenneth Williams at that particular point.
Yeah.
But whenever someone says, what's Maggie like? I say, well, have you ever watched Kenneth Williams in an interview or on one of those, great panel shows that he did?
Yeah.
And you could see him turn from being this wonderful wit that's surfing the waves of laughter and just embellishing. And then somebody says something that cheeses him off, and he suddenly swivels and it's like a sort of laser beam or a bee sting coming out. And I say, well, it's, Maggie could be a bit like that. She could be absolutely glorious. And then, if not in the right mood, she could, really whip you with a stinging comeback. So it was a delicate thing when you were, if you were approaching Maggie, you wanted to know which one was in the room that day.
Yeah.
And, sometimes she was in, to be honest, she was in, pain. She was in her late 70s, in her mid 70s when she started Downton, and she did it for a decade. I mean, that's a heck of a thing. thing. And sometimes not in the best of health, sometimes in pain and having had shingles and stuff. So who can blame her really?
Yeah.
But it was she was waspish and when on song absolutely brilliant and hilarious to be around.
Just like Kenneth Williams.
Like Kenneth Williams.
Exactly. I don't know if you've ever seen, just for anybody who's never seen the Parkinson interview with Betjeman and Maggie and Kenneth, and they read Death in Leamington to
oh my gosh,
to Betjeman, which is absolutely amazing. It's one of those. Yeah, it's superb. I think I'll post it this evening. But it's joyous. Are there any genres of comedy that you don't get on with? I always say when I was young, believe it or not, slapstick. I had no time for Laurel and Hardy or Chaplin. Harold Lloyd I could just about stand, but now I love it. But I hated it back then. Are there any genres that you don't get on with?
Don't get on with. That's interesting. I mean, I loved Chaplin and Laurel and Hardy when I was a kid, and who's that American double act that was Abbott and Costello?
Yeah.
I suppose I grew up with enjoying those, but Chaplin is just obviously the master from broad comedy to pathos. And the genius of his writing and things like The Dictator, etc., or the filmmaking of that. I suppose, if I'm really honest, I never really got things like Hello Hello or Heidi High. I just I don't know why. I know they're massivore popular.
Yep. That sort of Croft and Perry
actors.
That Croft and Perry stuff.
Yes, and yet, I adore Dad's Army. And I did a show with John Antrobus and Lawrence Marks, and obviously Marks and Gran had great a track record, and so I was not averse to studio sitcom at all. I loved it in certain forms, but I don't know, there was something about Hello Hello and Heidi High that I'd never quite clicked with, and I'm not quite sure why. Books have probably been written on genres of comedy and what they mean, but I couldn't sum up what that genre was, or indeed why I didn't quite get on with it.
I'm the same. When it comes to that sort of Croft and Perry, or Jeremy Lloyd as well, Are You Being Served? I'm okay with. Dad's Army, I love. But Hello Hello, it was all right for the first series, but I think it was the I Shall Say This Only Once and The Fallen Madonna with the big boobies. I think it was the repetition that it just like after series 2 when it got to I was just pissing by or whatever. I think it just I'm kind of with you on that, but Dad's Army is eternal. So let's get on to
but hang on, and yet Dad's Army has the same repetition, the same what the characters are going to, or at least how they if not what they're going to say, how they're going to react.
Don't panic, etc., etc. But I think what carried Dad's Army, it had those moments like Don't Tell Him Pike, those singular moments, which I don't think he really had with the others. If you know what I mean, there was I don't think Hello Hello or Heidi High had a Don't Tell Him Pike moment, that sort of thing that kind of like it's up there and everything else is wonderful, but you always go to the Don't Tell Him Pike moment. You see what I mean?
Yes, absolutely.
But your own history with comedy, because when we were talking, obviously we'll come on to W1A soon, but you've done, was it 2 or 3? Was it pilots, or you've done one series in sitcom before that?
Oh, I did. I took over from Nick Hancock in a rather ill-fated sitcom called Holding the Baby. And also I did an English version of a show called Married for Life, or I can't remember if that was the English title or the American title, with Russ Abbott. And it didn't really work. But I have to say, I loved working with Russ. He, again, maybe his sketches weren't quite my cup of tea. But as a comedic actor who took the work seriously, I've never worked with anyone like it. He would literally be there in the lunch breaks, rewriting the script, working on the script, trying to find a way through this. And I admired him hugely, even though the finished result didn't fly in the UK. So I'd been around that multi-camera sitcom, and then this other one I mentioned, Get Well Soon, which was set in a TB hospital just during or just after the war, I think, and which was really where Marks and Gran. I don't mean Marks and Gran, do I?
Galton and Simpson, where
Galton and Simpson.
met.
I'm so sorry. I take it all back. It was Ray Galton and Alan Simpson, and Ray Galton and John Antrobus wrote Get Well Soon. And again, it was that sort of world of of very distinctive characters. Not so much catchphrases, but good situations. It didn't really fly. We did one series, I think.
Yeah.
But again, it was great to be around that sort of writer of that sort of legendary track record. And it was Lawrence Marks. Who I think it was told me about. He was on the production team or one of the producers of Monty Python, or certainly working in the BBC at that time. And when the idea of putting these Oxford students and these Cambridge students, or these young comedic talents together, who'd been wherever they'd all bumped into each other. But anyway, the idea was to put them all together, and there was going to be this show.
Yeah.
And they ended up calling it Monty Python, but trying to explain to Hugh Carlton Green, the head of the BBC at the time, that some of these sketches wouldn't make sense, some of them wouldn't end, and they might be picked up, 4 scenes later, and some of them would be probably about philosophers and or the Spanish Inquisition, whatever. And apparently Hugh Carlton Green said, "This sounds so not my cup of tea. I can only give you 13 episodes." Imagine that today.
Good God, no, it wouldn't happen. Have you ever met a member of the Monty Python troupe?
I have actually. I've worked with I worked with John Cleese on when he had his what was it? It was sort of office training company that he'd set up back in the day,
didn't it? Yeah.
Yes, and then they were polishing them off and redoing them for a new audience in the 90s, I guess. And I did one of those and met him then. And I've met Michael Palin a couple of times, but and sadly never met Terry Jones, who, well, all of them I think have got such individual skills. And interestingly, going back to the topic of theology, about 10 years ago, I did a documentary in Jerusalem about the Passion of the Christ, because of my sort of vague, interaction with that subject when I was at university for Irish television, for RTE. And so I was interviewing, various scholars, archaeologists, first century scholars, scholars of the Dead Sea Scrolls, etc. And I think nearly all of them at some point mentioned Monty Python's Life of Brian and how accurate it was in terms of the first century situation. It's such a, they said, well, it's just easier to describe it in terms of Python. You know that bit when? And,
that's amazing.
And all of them refer to it. And this is the film that, obviously the Church of England tried to, or some elements of the Church of England tried to get banned. So again, their intelligence, be it on Holy Grail or that, or the meaning of life or whatever, their smartness just shone through in alongside their silliness. So I'm very lucky. I feel very honoured to have met a couple of them,
Absolutely.
but by no means all.
So 3 questions, because I'm a huge fan myself. So favourite Python song?
Probably Every Sperm is Sacred. I mean, lots of people will go to Always Look on the Bright Side of Life, but that's played at every blooming funeral. So I think Every Sperm is Sacred. I just love the audacity of it, or the big canvas on which it's performed, or as it grows. And isn't there a song in the middle of Holy Grail where all the Vestal Virgins, or whoever they are, and Michael Palin's being very pure? I think they do a song. No, it's not them. There's also a mad song in Holy Grail where they'd go into a full can routine.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Also, I can't remember the name of it.
Yeah. And there was we're Knights of the
We're
Round Table.
We're Knights of the Round Table. We dance wherever we're able.
Yeah. We do routines, etc. So, favourite film of the 3?
Life of Brian.
Life of Brian. And sketch.
Yeah.
Do you have a favourite sketch?
Spanish Inquisition.
Spanish Inquisition. You see, I think that the philosopher's song, I think the line "René Descartes was a drunken fart, I drink therefore I am," I think is, that if I'd written that, I would just go away and live on an island and retire and just sort of grin. Let's get on to W1A. I've been binging it again. And I've just started on 2026, but I've binged the whole lot. Just tell me how that came about, because we were talking about the whole sort of the 2 big satire shows from that period, The Thick of It and W1A, very similar in many ways, but very, very different in the way they were written and performed.
Well, W1A grew out of 2012, which itself really grew out of a show that John Morton had created on radio and then on TV called People Like Us, which was a sort of spoof on Down Your Way, a sort of radio for following ordinary people in their lives. And I did 3 episodes of that on radio, and I just fell in love with John's writing. And again, it's the sort of show which, you would tune in on Radio 4 and think you were listening to a documentary. Could take you up to a minute to realize you were listening to something absolutely ridiculous and that it was not a documentary at all. But it would take a while because it was played very straight and at a certain pace. I did one about a hotelier. I was an estate agent in one, and an airline pilot. That's right. And the joke was that Roy Mallard, who was the BBC interviewer, was always getting in the way of people getting on with their days. And in fact, in the airline episode, he was terrified of flying and was in the cockpit and kept sort of pressing the wrong button and screaming. And it was just a great gag. And then they moved it to TV, which I wasn't involved in. And then I can remember I was walking across, I was doing something in Parliament Square of all places, I think filming something or other. And the phone rang and it was Paul Schlesinger, the producer. And he said, John Morton is writing a show about the 2012 Olympics. And I said, I'm in. That's all. I just said, yeah, I'm in. I want to do it because I just loved his writing. And so 2012, which was set against the backdrop of the team trying to get the Olympic Games on. And of course, there was a mood in Britain that, we're going to muck it up, aren't we? Because let's face it, the Millennium Dome was a bit of a, not a white elephant, but it was, it sort of served its purpose in a way, but it was fell a little bit flat, I think, in the popular imagination.
Yeah.
And aren't we going to do the same with 2012? Aren't we a bit incompetent? It's a long time since the 50s, and we did what was it called? The Great Expo. So, and then, of course, it was an absolute triumph, in my view, and I think in many people's views. And so my character, Ian Fletcher, became the go-to hero to solve, massive administrative problems. So he was parachuted, and I had no idea where John was going with this idea, that he was parachuted into the BBC as head of values to sort out issues within the BBC. But again, as with 2012, it's not about having a go at the Olympics or having a go at the BBC. It's about having a go at, or rather observing how daft meetings are. Really, and the little fiefdoms that occur in any organisation, be it the parish council or a FTSE 100 company, and that was John's great genius. I think is for a man who doesn't get out much and is about the slowest writer on the planet. He has an amazing ear for dialogue and the absurdities of what we put each other through when trying to achieve something of quite national importance. Just going back to the thick of it, the reason they're quite distinctive. I mean, the thick of it clearly is, satire with a capital S. W1A wasn't. It wasn't satire. It was, as they say, it wasn't satirizing the BBC or television. It was just that culture, office culture, really. And 2026, similarly. But the difference in style is that with Armando Iannucci's scripts and that team's scripts on as I understand it anyway, on the thick of it, they would film the scripted version, get all that in the can, and then improvise certain elements of a scene, and so there's a hybrid and therefore a much more raw fly on the wall feel to that show, whereas in 2012 it's absolutely scripted, and I can tell you there's a world of difference between yes but no really when and when no but really yes. Which is so many. There's so many ticks of language that these characters used, or my character certainly had a lot of that sort of thing. And trying to learn it was just an absolute nightmare. But it's very orchestral, and there is a rhythm to each scene. And even though John would say, "Look, we only need these 5 seconds," and we'd all say, "No, we want to get the scene right. We don't want to fluff and go back." And it was always about trying to get the performance, the orchestration correct. Because often if you played a bum note, it just all felt wrong and you had to start again. So there were two similar but different shows with different sort of, not axes to grind, but different points of view anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that sort of semi improvisational sort of thing, which comes across, I think. Whereas with I don't know how you made that show. The fact that the timing is absolutely incredible, because there are so many. I mean, to read it on a script, it must have been, very, because timing wise, is it all in the performance? Is there a lot of clever editing there? How was it achieved?
Bit of everything. I mean, remember because the show 2012 started on BBC 4, And then it moved to BBC Two because it became successful. Then it won, a BAFTA or two, and started becoming a bit more in the mainstream.
Yeah.
But I remember some commissioning editors early on saying, "But these scripts are 60 pages. It's a 30-minute show." And I remember Paul Schlesinger and John Morton having to impress upon the suits that, don't worry, it'll be under 30 minutes because it will go very, very fast. But the fact is that, on one page you might have, yes, no, but surely, hang on, no, but yes, and that's already half a page.
Yeah.
It just went like the clappers, but it was all scripted. But we had the most amazing editor who did all three iterations of John's material. And I think I've done less ADR, which is the post-production voice recording, where you have to go and sort of drop in lines, either new lines to explain a bit of plot that's been cut, which is usually when it's on the back of your head.
Yeah.
And so a new line comes in, or indeed because there's been an overlap and it's clunked into,
Gotcha.
a line's been lost because you've cut from one angle to another. I've done less ADR on these three shows than on any other show. I don't know how the editing, was done, how he's done it, but apparently he would literally go to other bits of the show and grab a yes and stick it on where you'd been cut or something, and it was an amazing piece of editing. And also, John is a very brutal editor of his own material,
Right,
and
okay.
very clear. And I haven't. I'm not quite sure how 2026 has gone down, but again, that's set against the backdrop of the World Cup in the USA, and was a very different experience, but obviously similar style.
What was it like working with that original ensemble of actors with W1A? Because you get because obviously you're playing very, very different, strong, different characters. You have no idea how you actually get on, if you know what I mean. There is no sort of familiarity at all.
I think, well, with people like Sarah Parish and Jason Watkins, and I mean, this team. I'm just trying to remember a particular example, but really, we were all so sort of sweaty and panicky about trying to get the text right that we just spent every tea break running the lines. We just wanted to please Dad, John Morton, and get it right for him. When you've got a cast, of people like Jessica Hines, who'd been in 2012 as well, Sarah Parish, Monica Dolan, Rufus Jones, who's a wonderful writer as well as a superb comedian. Jonathan Bailey was in it. Jason Watkins. You've got people who've got great range as actors, both with they've got drama chops and comedy chops. But the key thing was that they knew that they never played that they were in a comedy. That was the key note.
Of course,
And John Morton's note, his continual note was, go faster and don't smile. As soon as you smile, you as a character, the smile, it releases air out of the scene. It's the very fact that they take life so seriously that's part of the comedy. And sometimes, it was brilliant watching John when somebody came in maybe as for a day on the show and had a preconceived idea of how the character should be, and just seeing John steer them into the same lane as we were. Which is a great skill, because you don't want to say to any actor, no, that's wrong, do it like this, but to try and get us all on the same highway, if you like, obviously being different, but trying to channel people onto the same path is a great skill from a director. And not everyone can do it, and sometimes that's why you see discordant shows where you think, hang on, that doesn't chime, that doesn't work. But he's brilliant at that. Not every writer can direct his own material, but he can, and frankly, I can't imagine anybody else doing it.
I was going to say, I think
tricky.
you said before, he's the only person who could do it. The Rooms, one of the funniest parts of the, Seaman Frankie Howard or Morecambe and Wise or whatever. Having never been into Broadcasting House, do those rooms actually exist?
Well, they do, and they really arose once the BBC moved from White City and really installed itself in this chrome building, which of course has two entrances. So you go into Broadcasting House, or you go into Broadcasting House. I mean, it's quite dotty. So there's new Broadcasting House and old Broadcasting House, and I mean, it's so comedic in its own way. Bless them. But yes, and there was a time when you did sit on sort of weird,
like green spiky cushions and things like that.
And there are sort of hotspot meeting points. And there was a whole period where you didn't have your own desk. And so this sort of fiefdom of someone putting their gonk down on a table and saying that's mine, or you'd see someone's smelly trainers under a desk, basically claiming ownership. So that whole era of hot desking, which I think is, I don't know, but I suspect is slightly, has gone away a bit now, was fascinating. And again, John just picked up all these little details that were great little observations
Oh,
about
yeah.
office life. Not just the BBC,
No.
but this whole new world of 0 hours contracts and hot desking, had whatever you want to call it, and breakout zones, and throwing can at the wall and seeing if it sticks, and all that sort of corporate stuff that he was just brilliant at analysing.
See, I thought it was satirising the BBC, but no, you're absolutely right. But some of the funniest moments are where you're sitting there having a meeting and you've got the top of Frankie Howard's head sort of looking straight at you. Just, I mean, from a director's point of view, that's genius. It really, really is.
It was really good. It was really fun. Or Mary Berry, or whoever it might be. But you're making it, particularly if you're making a really serious point, and you've got Frankie Howard sort of in the background.
Exactly.
And but John Sorapure, who is the director of photography, who's been on to, in fact, he did a lot of the work on Paddington and as well. But he had a very good comedic eye. And because the situation, or rather the scripts, are so funny, you just needed a camera team who knew how to hold a camera while laughing, and they were very generous supporters of what we were trying to do. But they managed. I guess because it's a slightly wobbly camera show, any sort of heaving shoulders were they could cut around them.
What's the happiest stroke funniest show or production you've ever been lucky enough to work on?
Oh, golly, that's a tricky one. I suspect I'm going to have to say the final beats of Downton, when we knew it was the final film and it really was the end of an era.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd like to say W1A and those shows, but I do find them incredibly stressful.
Yeah.
I can't wait. I'm literally counting down the days till we've finished, and I can put those scripts aside.
Yeah.
But always with great actors involved. So I've always cherished those, and I cherish the outcome when I see the final result. But I think in terms of just having done 15 years on Downton, and we knew it was coming to an end. So I genuinely, each time we were coming to the final shots in each particular location, be it the dining room of the castle, or some part of the estate, or whatever, I really did try and sear them into my memory bank, because I knew that we wouldn't be coming back, and it had been a very happy and positive part of my life for a long time.
Has comedy or humour ever helped you through a difficult time?
Oh gosh, yes, absolutely. I mean, I return to the tapes of the early stand-up of Woody Allen, which I listened to a lot when in my early teens.
Yeah.
And I've been through some low patches where I just want to get back into that world where the writing and the performance are so combined. I love Woody Allen's stand-up material. I shot a moose once, and even though there were loads of references in that material that I had no idea, they went straight over my head because they were about topical New York or American references. It didn't matter. It was the world that he created. So I was a huge fan of his writing and performing. I mean, particularly, everyone says that another serious Woody Allen film, but the earliest, Sleeper was one of my earliest. Absolute. I used to watch it again and again.
Do you remember? Do you remember the story he told? I remember it was a bit of a Kennedy moment. I remember the first time I listened to his stand-up, and I think he was describing he'd been offered a vodka commercial when he started to get famous, and so went to see his rabbi, and to get permission from his rabbi. His rabbi said no, and then he went into the shop and he saw his rabbi on the calendar advertising vodka.
Genius.
Which to look at sounds, whatever, not really funny. When he told it, I remember, and that's why it's a Kennedy moment. It was amazing. It stayed with me forever. Superb.
Absolutely. No, his delivery, and again, just listening to the timing, and I don't know which comedy venue he was in, but you can almost smell the smoke of that sort of small room. You can hear the clink of bottles and glasses, and just how many times has he flopped? I don't know. How long has he taken to hone this material so that it's just absolutely brilliant in terms of the delivery. John Bishop's a friend of mine, and I've loved watching him. How he times stuff, how he shapes stuff. which appears effortless, you know, and I say, I know it's not effortless. I know a lot of hard work and many times falling flat on your face have been, you know, have been the precursor. But no, comedy really, obviously, you know, lightens one in dark times.
Of course.
But I tend to go back to Python. You know, I used to go to bed at night. I used to with my tape recorder. I'd put the cassette in of the soundtrack of Life of Brian or Holy Grail, particularly.
Yeah.
And that whole brilliant title sequence with the film breaking down and the people who've done the title sequence being fired and a new company coming in and doing them, just the wit upon wit, the layer upon layer of comedy. And again, there's the moose. Yes, a moose once bit my sister, and graphics like that would pop up. Just genius, which they managed to sort of almost translate onto the audio version. But I would drift off to sleep at night listening to those great legends. And again, Bob Newhart. I love listening to his material even now.
Would you ever do something like farce? Would you ever do?
I would. Do you know? I would love to. I was talking to a friend the other day, and they said, you know, next time you go on stage, what do you want to do? And I said, I would love to find a modern farce. And, you know, when that first cast of Noises Off hit the stage with Nicky Henson and Paul Eddington and Patricia Routledge, I remember, because I didn't know the gag, you know, luckily, because it was a new play. I remember going to see it, I guess, in the West End, and Patricia Routledge suddenly dried, and she got a bit, you know, material wrong, and suddenly the voice from the auditorium was saying, no, you put the plate down, then you pick up the, you know. And I thought, oh my God. And it took another 30 seconds for you to go, oh, I see. We're watching a rehearsal, you know. And then the genius of it just escalates, and the madness. And it is a farce. It's so clever. Michael Frayn's a genius in that. But in terms of, if you like, the Whitehall farces or the Brian Riggs type farces, I don't think, you know, some of them probably hold up in the same way.
No. What about London Assurance or something like that?
Possibly, yeah. I mean, I suppose, yes, that is, I suppose, classified as a farce. But I'd love to find a modern one. You know, but I think a farce depends on. I mean, like Fado, of course. You know, it was all those sort of sexual mores that were being trampled on, and you know, hide in the cupboard because my wife's coming, or hide in the cupboard because my mistress is coming, or whatever it is. We'd have to find a new way of those. What are the taboos now? What are the mores now that we could be, you know, embarrassed by? Or that we have to sort of escalate, spiral things out of control so that they reach a giddy height for our heroes, our protagonists, to try and get out of.
Well, Fado's dead.
It's a joyous thing. When it works, it's a joyous thing. Sorry?
Well, Fado's dead. Ray Cooney's retired. So we need somebody to step into the breach and sort of reinvent farce for the 21st century, really.
I think it would be a joy, because I know that every theatre producer would love the next, you know, copper bottom hit of a comedy, but they're few and far between. So yeah, I'm up for that.
Two more questions. If you were to have a guest appearance on any current comedy show, or over the last 10 years or so, you know, when you had all those people going into Friends back in the day, etc. If you could do a cameo, pop up anywhere, whether it's a sketch show, it could be Saturday Night Live, I don't know, Modern Family or whatever, what would float your boat? What would make you say yes?
Oh, I think the first one, there are many, but the first one that's popped into my head is Curb Your Enthusiasm.
Yeah.
I just think the way that Larry David constructed that over the years, and just so many talents were involved in that over the years. And I'm delighted to say I haven't even watched all of them, so I've got a real treat ahead of me. I think I would love to have appeared in that. Seinfeld, I adored over the years, and the Larry Sanders Show. I thought just
that was genius.
Gorgeous.
Yeah,
absolute genius. So I suppose those are the shows that have an edge of reality, or you know, where you can have real people appearing and blurring the edges of what is real and fiction. I've always enjoyed those. You know, indeed, in W1AM 2012, we had real people appearing, and that was always added a nice frisson. I would love to be parachuted into any one of those if they were still in production.
Okay. Finally, now we can't do the desert island thing because we get sued, but we're going to go to the moon. You've got one human being, alive or dead, who's going to make you laugh. You've got an LP, and you've got a TV show. You got one of each to take with you. Because I was speaking to the broadcaster Stephanie Hurst, and she's a big Kenny Everett fan. And she said Kenny Everett would be perfect because Kenny Everett would make you laugh, but he also liked his own space. So he'd bugger off to the dark side of the moon. So he wouldn't be there like an Eric Morecambe, constantly on, like a Tony Slattery, always on. So just think about it for a second. Who would be the perfect companion? Who would make you laugh but give you some space?
I think probably Les Dawson, actually, because I think, again, he was from what I understand, I never met him or knew him, but he was a really, really talented
a
musician.
novelist, a good musician. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He made me laugh. I mean, I did meet Roy Barraclough. I worked with Roy Barraclough once, who was part of his little double act when
Sissy
they did
and
the two
Ada.
ladies,
Yeah.
Stissy and Ada. And Roy made me laugh, and he spoke very fondly of Les.
Yeah.
And all those sort of doorstep ladies, the ladies, as it were, on their doorstep gossiping about what's going on, and all that. But I do think you could tell that Les Dawson was quite a wise man.
Yeah.
I don't mean in terms of just intellectual wisdom, but just, he was well read, he was talented,
Yeah.
and he probably would get quite bored of me and go off and be on his own. So that would be quite good. But he could play beautiful piano to me as he,
Perfect.
as we drifted off to sleep,
Yeah.
and he could make me laugh.
He
just
could
by
play it
looking at him.
badly. He could play it well.
Yes,
He could play it
exactly.
badly. Perfect. Best of both worlds.
Well, you have to be really good to play it badly.
You do. So LP, which one of those pythons, I assume one of the pythons, are you going to take with you?
I think it would be. It probably did. They do a audio version of the Big Red Book? I don't. No, they didn't. That was just a book, wasn't it? It was blue.
Yeah.
But I think I'd probably take either the Holy Grail or no. I would take Life of Brian.
Yeah.
Because all the sketches, all the individual beats of the film version, I can see in my head still. So whether it's the the graffiti scene when they're having a sort of Latin declension lesson, or obviously, Bigger Stickers.
Yeah.
I mean, they're just genuinely, they still make me laugh now. And seeing Chris Langham and the others trying not to corpse, whether they are corpsing or genuinely corpsing, I don't know. And, the jury's out on some of it, but it is sublime, and I love it. So yeah, I'd happily listen to that LP over and over.
TV show.
I think it would be Curb. I think it would be probably Curb in terms of comedies. I think it probably would be. Actually, no, Seinfeld. Or Dad's Army. You see, Dad's Army would make me a bit nostalgic, but it would take me back to a simpler time, but with great comedic actors and a sense of England sort of being plucky and trying to hold out against the enemy, as it were,
Yeah.
and that sense of the team. So that's a difficult one, but I'm going to go with, I don't know how many episodes there were of Dad's Army. It feels like there were hundreds, but of course there weren't.
I think from memory, about 70, 75, something like that.
Okay,
Yeah.
quite a few.
Which, which is one series of Curb Your Enthusiasm, isn't it, basically? Because or maybe two.
Maybe two. Yeah, so... But I think if I'm allowed, I think I'll do a sort of double. I'll do a half and half DVD, which I'll take with me. Half Curb, half Dad's Army, if I may.
You can. Hugh Bonneville, it's been a fantastic hour. Thank you very, very much indeed. Appreciate it.
Thanks, James. Lovely to chat to you.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.